Good afternoon. Today we're going to review week 1 of Rad 2. And the first thing that I'm going to do is go over a few of the lecture material that we talked about this week. Okay? So this weekend lecture, the first thing that we started going over was congenital anomalies. And we only talked about one so far, so I'm going to go in detail with that one. Okay? So the one that we talked about was called occipitalization. And this is basically where our C1 fuses with our occiput. So C1 and the occiput are fused together, and it's indicated on a lateral x-ray, and you can kind of picture that since our spine is turned laterally. So what's going to end up happening is our posterior tubercle is going to be consistent with our occiput, and that's going to be indicated by a smooth line on our lateral x-ray. In order to confirm this, we have to do a flexion and extension view of our occiput. So in a flexion view, what should happen is these two should separate, and it'll be shown as a V-like indentation on between the occiput and atlas. If they are fused together as in occipitalization, there will be a continuous smooth line, and it should be very apparent in a flexion and extension view. Okay? Extension is just the opposite. So in extension, they should come together. It shouldn't look the same as the regular lateral view. It'll be shown as a smooth line yet again. Okay? And on a test, since we can't do a flexion and extension study, what we'll do is just look for the V-like indentation between occiput and atlas. So if she puts up a film and she says, is this an occipitalization? We know if there's an indentation, then there's no occipitalization. That's it for lecture so far. I'm going to go to lab. We talked about a few measurements of some of the structures indicated on our handout. And the first one is for sella turcica. This is a review from last quarter. The A to P dimensions for the sella turcica is 5 to 16 millimeters. The average is 11 millimeters. The S to I dimension for sella turcica is 4 to 12 millimeters. The average is 8 millimeters. For ADI, our adults should have an ADI of between 1 and 3 millimeters. In other words, it should be no greater than 3 millimeters. So this is something that she said in lab that might trip people up on board sometimes. For children, our ADI should be between 1 and 5 millimeters or no greater than 5 millimeters. In adults, if our ADI is greater than 3, then that most likely means that there's an issue of rheumatoid arthritis that's caused by rheumatoid arthritis causes a laxity in the transverse ligament. And in children, it'll be manifested as chronic bacterial infections. And what happens is the fever that children experience by having multiple chronic bacterial infections or ear infections is going to cause that laxity in that transverse ligament. The next landmark that we talked about was the line, George's line. And George's line is drawn along the posterior aspect of the vertebral bodies as what I'm showing with my pen right here. So posterior aspect of the vertebral bodies, and that's going to show the integrity of the cervical spine. So we don't want any breaks in the George's line. We don't want one of the vertebrae to be shown as going more posterior than the other. We want a smooth curve. The next line is going to be the posterior cervical line, and that's going to be shown, somewhat hard to see, but it's going to be shown right here along the spinal laminar junctions. Spinal laminar junctions. The next one that we discussed was the A to P sagittal dimensions, and this is going to be shown from the George's line along the posterior aspect of the vertebral bodies and the posterior cervical line. So we're going to be measuring from here to here on an x-ray. The next and the last one is going to be the measurement of the prevertebral soft tissue. And this is going to be measured from the posterior aspect of an airway, which would be the trachea or the larynx or pharynx, to the anterior aspect of the vertebral bodies. So if this is my airway, I'm going to be measuring from the posterior aspect of this to my anterior aspect of my vertebral bodies. This information can be found in Yoakum and Rowe, pages 208 and 209. And that's it. Happy studying.